RIP AIM, the instant messaging service that shaped our teenage lives. Under my bed, I have a box stuffed with high school memories, including a bright orange binder labeled "Warning, this is not school-related." Inside, there are pages and pages of deeply meaningful conversations I had on AOL Instant Messenger, full of gossip, flirting, and those tortured goodbyes. Like this one, .SWEET and SOUR 435. It was me. In the early 2000s, AIM already had more than 36 million active users. Many of them were angst-ridden teenagers, unwittingly committing their first act of personal branding, picking a screen name. There was DANCECHICK3871. BASEBALLGUY42, Beach Babexlox. 20 years after its inception, AOL Instant Messenger will officially sign off on today. There aren't many 20 and 30-something-year-olds who are still loyal to the service. In fact, most people probably think it died long ago. But not Barry Appelman. He's been logging into AIM to chat with his friends nearly every day for the past 20 years. You could say Appelman was one of AIM's earliest adopters. He helped invent it. Back in the 90s, Appelman worked at AOL as our manager in development. He was the guy behind the buddy list, that thing that told people which of their friends were online. But chatting on AOL back then was clunky and took a lot of effort. Appelman wanted to make it easier for AOL subscribers. "I sort of put my thoughts on paper and said, we need to do this as a stand-alone product for the internet," Appelman said. So, along with a small team, he started designing an instant messaging service. Behind closed doors, AOL didn't know about it. "We built this in secret, in development, telling no one," he said. And when AIM was introduced in 1997, it was with little fanfare and the company didn't embrace the service. Appelman said back then, offering a free messaging service rather than a paid subscription was considered less than a solid business idea. "There are very few people willing to say, oh, we should embrace this and toss all that old stuff that's making us money," he said. At the time, AOL's revenue and business model depended on people subscribing. Even after AIM exploded, after everyone from Wall Street traders to 10th graders were using it, Appelman said AOL didn't make AIM a priority. His team tried to find ways to monetize the service, but advertising never really took off. Meanwhile, AOL itself was starting what would be its own long decline. But like so many tech pioneers, AIM helped set the stage for the companies that would eventually surpass it, said Karen North, a professor of digital social media at the University of Southern California. For example, they had a news ticker and stock tickers, they had the ability to do talk or do voice before Skype, they had file sharing for music, she said. AIM also deserves some credit for social media's emotional shorthand, like little acronyms like LOL to emojis and profiles, North said. Instant messaging was like the prep course for expressing yourself online. It's where SOCCBRDUDE58, aka Patrick Duplessis, asked out his first girlfriend in elementary school. "I was just so excited by her response, because she said yes, that I printed out the conversation and brought it to school and showed all my friends," he said. It's why no one in Beach Babexlox's house could get a phone call in edgewise. Dial-up was the thing back then, and Gabrielle Carollo was always logged on. "OMG, all day long," she said. "Literally, all day." And it's where Kate Silla, also known as XOXODA and CD9312, mastered the art of an away message. With AIM permanently going away, I feel like a little break in my heart, like a childhood loss or something, she said. Me too. Saying goodbye to AIM, the instant messenger that changed how we communicate. After 20 years, the time has come to say a final goodbye to AOL Instant Messenger. The famed chat client, more commonly known as AIM, is one of the internet's longest-lasting cultural touchstones. and one of the few pieces of software that arguably changed how people interact with each other. AOL announced in October that the beloved program would be shutting down for good on December 15th and broke the news on a Tumblr called AIM Memories. A strong indicator of how firmly relegated to nostalgia AOL Instant Messenger had already become. But that doesn't negate its cultural influence or its influence over the many messaging apps that have emerged in its wake. AIM was the chat client for a generation, one that left an indelible mark on the way we talk to each other online. AIM entered an entire generation's lives as part of the internet's great cultural osmosis. AOL Instant Messenger was born in 1997. It wasn't the web's first instant messaging client, a different one called Dirk preceded it by nearly a decade. But it was the instant messaging client that most widely proliferated at a moment when the internet was just starting to become a real part of people's daily lives. AOL was the first major internet service provider that many Americans experienced back in the mid-90s, and most of its products were available for AOL users only. But in a stroke of genius, which the company's owners initially hated, AOL developers chose to make their first chat client, AIM, free to download for non-AOL users as well. This move meant that AOL had a much deeper reach into our homes than any would-be competitors. AIM's design, with its bright colors and square shapes, would become indelibly associated with nostalgia for 90s internet culture. Its logo, a little yellow running man who greeted you by eagerly racing to sign in, is now iconic. It was designed by Joran Lazaro, who told The Atlantic in 2014 that he had been inspired by the round, well-defined shape, figures of post-war logos and trademarks. AIM offered us that first crucial taste of the interactive world we now occupy and take for granted. It was part of a cultural moment where its level of virtual interactivity was still new and exciting, when making friends on the internet was still a scary and exhilarating experience. When chatting with a crush for hours online was often easier than talking to them at school the next day, when that familiar sound of a door opening as a friend arrived online could perk your interest. And that familiar new message ping could trigger real emotions when a carefully chosen username or a carefully chosen quote in a carefully selected font set to serve as your away message could say more about your personality than anything else. And oh, the tricky politics that came with an away message. And all the subtle intricacies of online social etiquette, which we were all collectively figuring out, usually via AIM. Back in the days before blocking and muting someone on social media were common. Before passive-aggressive subtweeting was somewhat routine, friendships could be tossed into upheaval over the mere act of warning someone. Remember the warn button? It allowed you to essentially buzz someone, see the lightning bolt icon in the image below to tell them they'd gone a step too far. If a person was warned enough times, they had to take the equivalent of what we now think of as an enforced timeout before they could sign in again. Then there were the perils of going invisible, making yourself look as though you were offline when you really weren't. It was a great way to avoid a friend you didn't feel like talking to, unless they somehow managed to find out you were ghosting them in the era before ghosting existed. For many of us, AIM was the platform through which we learned much of the early internet speak that's common parlance today, that phrases like BRB, LOL, and Rotflmouse somehow became integral parts of how we communicate to one another on the internet still 2 decades later is a mark of how homogeneous the AIM experience was for the millions of people who used it. At its peak in the early 2000s, AIM was the most commonly used chat client in North America. And even in the twilight of 2006, as the dawn of modern social media was beginning to encroach upon the quaint instant messaging service as a ubiquitous form of communication, it still had 53 million active users, dwarfing its closest competitors, MSN, Yahoo, and Google Talk. AIM presaged the way we talk to each other today. While AIM thrived, the legacy of its creator, AOL, is one of a storied rise and fall, from once mighty internet service provider to floundering tech giant to piecemeal communications company to Finally, the result of an odd, bedfellow wedding to its former nemesis Yahoo as part of a complicated merger carried out by Verizon. AIM might have continued to flourish. Was it not so deeply tied to its failing parent? But it was also a victim, in the early aughts, of the rise of Web 2.0 and the subsequent age of social media, and the emergence of a fully mobile internet that made it tough for the old guards of AIM, MSN, and Yahoo to compete with up and coming young whippersnappers like Snapchat, Twitter, or WhatsApp. Third-party chat clients like Trillian and Datium arrived relatively late in the game, launching in 2000 and 2001, respectively. Both attempted to give users a way to bring all of their clients into one application. But by the time such clients had gained saturation among online chatters a few years later, texting and social media had taken over, and the way we thought of chat was changing. Instead of seeing an instant messaging client as a destination, or online conversations as a unique, isolated behavior, we began to experience organic digital interaction as a larger part of our daily lives. As of 2011, AIM's market share had dropped to an incredible low of under 1%. Still, AIM's enduring influence cannot be denied. So many of the features it revolutionized are now commonplace. The buddy list, a then-brand new way of displaying all your contacts in a sidebar and showing when they're online and offline, is now a ubiquitous part of most of today's communication-based software, from Slack to Skype. Twitter recently instigated a warning and timeout system similar to the one AIM pioneered. The ability to block a user, customize your online or offline status, be notified when someone messages you, even if you're away from the app. These are all things we take for granted as a routine part of the messaging, texting, or social media experience. Alice Chuang, a product designer at Facebook Messenger, told Vox in an email that AIM profoundly influenced both the world of messaging design and her as an individual designer. For many of us who came of age in the 2000s, AIM transitioned us into the world of digital communication, she explained. Chuang continued, the chat window was texting before the smartphone was ubiquitous. Mercurial away messages represented our identities before social media arrived. AIM paved the way for real-time communication as we know it today, and was undoubtedly instrumental in my decision to work at Messenger to further connect our world and enrich the way we communicate with the people and businesses we love. AIM is the last of the original chat gang to die. MSN called it quits in 2014. Yahoo Messenger bit the bullet in 2015. And while Lurk, the original server-based chat client, is still going strong, it functions much differently than other forerunning social apps. Its echoes are largely found in multi-faceted group chat programs like Slack. While AIM's heirs are an endless stream of social messaging systems, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, WeChat, Kik, and many more. In essence, AIM was a tiny but fundamental